Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila, and I have actually two short stories together to tell you. The first one doesn't really have a name, but the second one's called In His Steps. Well, the first story I remember from when I was little. My grandma told us about how they moved to Oregon from Des Moines, Iowa. Now, there was a reason they wanted to move. They owned a nice farm outside of Des Moines. But the winters were so severe. It was kind of like here in North Dakota. It was so very, very cold, and the snow was so very deep, and they had blizzards where the snow blew round and round in circles and made huge drifts. Well, Grandma, she finally went to Grandpa and she said, I've read about Oregon, and they don't have this terrible cold and this terrible snow. Let's move to Oregon. So Grandpa agreed. Now they had 5 children. They had Jim and Bob and Gordon and Jack, who was my father, and Donna Mae. Well, all 5 of those children helped Grandpa and Grandma pack everything they had, and they put it into the back of a big farm truck. And I'm sure they took their car, and away they went to Oregon. It was summertime. It was a perfect time to travel. When they got to Oregon, they had driven 1,848 miles in that old farm truck in their little car. When they got there, they went to Jefferson, Oregon, and they bought a farm there. Well, Grandma thought it was lovely. You know, it's really green and beautiful in Oregon. And in Jefferson, it's kind of in the rolling hills. And there were lots of trees and lots of beautiful green grass. And Grandma thought, this is wonderful. And no big snowstorms to worry about. Well, that winter, you can guess it. Once in a while, Oregon gets some snow. I was raised there. I know that sometimes we had snowy Christmases, but never feet and deep drifts like they'd had in Iowa. But Grandma told me the first winter that they were in Oregon, it started to snow, and it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed. Well, the next morning, when all 5 of those kids got up, you know, they looked around and it was very dark. All the windows in that 2-story house downstairs were covered by snow. That's why it was so dark. Well, those kids ran upstairs and they found that one of the bedrooms in the very top of that big old house, the snowdrift hadn't reached but to the edge of the windowsill. Well, they looked out at that snow and they couldn't resist. So they opened that window, and one by one they climbed out on the windowsill, and they looked out, and the snow was from the windowsill all the way down. Well, they just sat on their little pants and out the window they went. Whew. Matter of fact, all the way through the yard and into the field they slid. It was marvelous. But poor Grandma, it wasn't supposed to snow like this in Oregon. Well, that's as much of that story as I'm going to tell you. But our story is called In His Footsteps. The Stanfords, they lived in a home up in Canada, and they had 3 children. You know, Canada can be very cold, and it can have lots and lots of snow, just like here in North Dakota. Well, the kids had 2 friends from school, Bessie and Ned, visiting. I don't know, the story doesn't tell why they were staying overnight at the Stanford's house, but that's what happened. And the next morning when they got up, they went into the kitchen to have breakfast, and it was dark, dark. What do you suppose was making it so dark? Well, one of the Stanford boys went over and he raised the blind. And there they saw why it was so dark in the kitchen. The snow had covered the window. They tried to open the front door, but the snow was so deep. Now, Bessie and Ned, I don't know whether they lived in a little town where the snow was dug out by others. I don't know, but they weren't used to this. And they said, how are we going to get to school? Because they all went to the little school that was about a mile from the Stanford's house. And Bessie said, we'll never get to school. Well, Mr. Stanford, he was standing there and he said, oh, don't worry, Bessie. We'll get to school. So, of course, they all had breakfast and they got dressed. And Mr. Stanford said, now every one of you has to help me scoop out this snow so we can get you to school. Well, so there were 5 kids with Bessie and Ned there, and Daddy. They all went outside while Mother was going to do the breakfast dishes, and they started shoveling. Now, they couldn't go through the kitchen door, but they started shoveling. When they opened the front door, there was tons of snow there, too. But Dad started chopping and pushing, and the kids followed with their shovels, and they all started pushing away that snow. It took them a long time, but they had started really early when they saw that snow was there. And pretty soon they were out the front gate of the front lawn. But there was still deep, deep snow. And from that front gate, they could see the very top of the schoolhouse, which was about a mile away. And they said, we'll never get there. We'll fall in the snow. Well, Father said, all you have to do is follow in my footsteps. So the kids thought, okay. So Dad, he had on his big rubber boots, And Dad had very long legs, but I'm sure he took shorter steps, and he would sink way down in that soft snow. He would take a couple steps, and then he would wait. He turned around and he said, "Just walk in my footsteps." Well, the steps were close enough together that the kids could lift one foot and put it down into that footstep, down in the snow. Then they'd pull the other foot in. Then they would step into the next one. It was hard work because the snow was so deep to get over from step to step. But where Dad had stepped was hard snow. It had packed the snow down. So step by step, that whole line of 5 children following Mr. Stanford, each walking in his steps, made their way to the school. They couldn't believe it. They had made it. And Father said, "Of course you made it. You did what you were told. You walked in my footsteps." And the school door wasn't open yet. So Father said, "You know what, boys and girls? This is just like what Jesus told us to do. He told us if we follow in his footsteps, we'll get through this life here on earth and we'll get to heaven. We'll follow him right there. But no matter how hard it is, just like how hard it was for you to walk through that deep snow, boys and girls, that's what you have to do. You have to keep following in Jesus' way. And if you do, you will get to live with him." I think you've all learned a good lesson today walking through the snow. You know, there's a Bible verse in 1 Peter. Let's see here. 1 Peter 2:21. And this is what it says. "Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his steps." Do you know, this story was not just for Mr. Stanford's children. This story's for every one of us. Because if we follow close to Jesus, just like he told us to, we will all be in heaven together. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.